Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great Red Ribbon Week and try and say that 3 times. It's really hard. You'll mess up. But I hope you're having fun with the theme week, and I love everybody's costumes. Seeing everybody in their costumes today has been really fun. Um, so I want to talk about Red Ribbon Week. After I talk, you're going to watch a video about the history of Red Ribbon Week, how that got started. And that's a really interesting story. And it's also a kind of sad story. But I think it's super important for us to kind of hear where Red Ribbon Week originated from. And then we're also going to watch a video about how drugs affect our brains. And it has some really interesting information about how our brains shrink and how the chemicals in our brain get adjusted when we are using drugs or alcohol. So, before we get to that, though, I just want to talk about a little bit two things. One, I think many people in our building, students and teachers, have experienced a loved one or a close friend who has struggled with substance abuse or addiction or alcoholism. And I know of a couple of my friends that have struggled or are struggling with this. And it's really heartbreaking to watch them battle this. It is recovery, sobriety is not easy. It is not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot of guts, it takes a lot of strength and bravery and courage to get sober. Um, One particular friend of mine I think about, super bright, super smart, great career, family, all of that. But she had a lot of emotional pain in her life, trauma that she had been through as a younger girl, and and it was painful emotionally that she never dealt with, and eventually that pain caught up to her, and she wanted an escape from the pain, and she started drinking and using pills. And through that, she lost her career. She's lost her family. She's been in jail numerous times. She has been in rehab numerous times. Um, she is still fighting. She is still fighting to be sober. And she is doing much better now than she was just even a few months ago or a year ago. She's not quite there yet, but she's getting close, and she's starting to work through all of those hard things that she needs to work through. And that's what really usually gets people stuck in addiction many times, is there are things that they're trying to escape from. So connecting with a great support system or a therapist to kind of work through those things is super important. So the other thing I want to talk about is peer pressure. There is a lot of peer pressure to try something, to try the alcohol, to try marijuana, to try some substance. How do you stand up to peer pressure? And I think really there isn't a lot of easy ways to do that. But the biggest thing to be able to feel confident in doing is saying no. Remembering what your life goals are, what you hope for and dream of having, whether it's a family, going to college, starting a career, going to a trade school, whatever it may be. Know what your dreams and aspirations are. And remember, drugs and alcohol will prevent you from having those things. And so I really want you guys at the end of these videos to kind of talk a little bit about, how do you stand up to peer pressure? How do you say no? How do you handle when other friends are experimenting with drugs or alcohol? How do you handle that? Big conversation. So if you have time to do that today, that'd be great. If not, maybe that can be continued to Friday. So here's a video about the history of Red Ribbon Week and how drugs affect our brains. I hope you guys have a great week.
America first saw Enrique Camarena 33 years ago when the death of his father, Kiki Camarena, made national news. It was 1985 and the Camarenas were living in Guadalajara, Mexico. Enrique was only 11 years old, but he understood that his father was working undercover for the DEA.
He was keeping drugs from coming to the United States.
Shortly after helping bust a $1 billion marijuana operation, Kiki disappeared, and the family home was suddenly filled with armed agents.
Within about 5 or 6 hours, there's a dozen to 2 dozen agents that arrived.
Were you scared for your father?
Well, your dad's Superman, so you think, we'll see him, he'll be fine.
But Kiki had been kidnapped. Enrique remembers how he and his brothers were rushed out of Mexico to the U.S.
This linebacker of a man picks me up and fireman carries me and runs full sprint from my living room to a waiting vehicle.
Kiki Camarena's body was found a month later. He'd been tortured to death with a drill. Years later, when Enrique was deciding on his own career, one late-night conversation with his father stuck in his mind.
He asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said, I want to be just like you. And the answer was a swift, no, you're not. Wasn't going to have a law enforcement son.
So the son stayed away from law enforcement, but not the law. Enrique became a prosecutor.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
And was appointed judge in 2014.
Good morning, everyone.
Where he now presides over cases involving children.
She's in the right place to get ready for more time with Dad.
How do the lessons you learned from your dad over the years translate into your courtroom?
He taught us to treat everyone fairly, to be respectful.
Do you ever think about what your dad would think if he saw you now?
Yeah, I think obviously he'd be proud.
Every week, Enrique visits the Law Enforcement Memorial in San Diego and kisses his father's name, honoring his hero with his own service. Carter Evans, CBS News.
With long-term alcohol and drug abuse, the brain physically changes. The brain shrinks, actually shrinks, and its ability to process information is damaged. A part of the brain called the limbic system, which supports a variety of functions including emotion, behavior, motivation, long-term memory, and olfaction, is affected by heavy alcohol or drug abuse. When someone drinks or takes drugs, the limbic system emits dopamine, the substance that makes us feel good. With prolonged abuse, the brain stops making as much dopamine as it used to. As a result, the brain's reward system receives very little input, and the person has a hard time experiencing pleasure of any kind. That's why many drug and alcohol abusers are no longer interested in the things that used to bring them joy. The frontal lobe of the brain also suffers. It shrinks and loses its ability to function properly. This part of the brain regulates decisions, choices, and the ability to know the difference between right and wrong. When the frontal lobe is not working as it should, you can't control the impulse to drink or take drugs. The amygdala is controlled by the frontal lobe and is the emotional center of the brain. Without proper control from the frontal lobe, the amygdala becomes oversensitive to stress. In this state, someone can have extreme mood swings and become trapped in a state of panic and worry. Because of this, many addicts and alcoholics are constantly fearful and rarely feel safe. The cellular structure of the brain is affected by heavy drinking and drug use as well. The gray cells control thinking and feeling, while the white cells provide the connection and communication between the gray cells. They're like network cables, passing information from one gray cell to another. Persistent drug and alcohol use kills the white cells in the brain. This severs the communication pathways so that information is not passed along properly. The brain can reroute these communication pathways using the remaining white cells but it requires abstinence and time for this to happen. These negative effects that drugs and alcohol have on the brain are frightening. But there's good news. If someone can stop drinking and taking drugs completely, the brain begins to heal. Cognitive function and brain shrinkage can be reversed. New pathways in the brain can be forged, and a person can return to normal brain function. If someone can learn to live without the drugs or alcohol, there is hope for full physical recovery.